I stood on the porch of my childhood home, clutching my shivering 5-year-old daughter Diana, while the rain soaked through our clothes. The earthquake had taken everything we owned, and I thought my parents would be our last safety net. Instead, my mother, Catherine, blocked the doorway with a cold stare I'll never forget. "We have no space for her, Elena," she said, her voice like ice. My father, Gerald, stood behind her, arms crossed in agreement. They told me I was welcome to stay, but only if I left my daughter behind in the storm. Inside, the lights were warm. I could see my sister Regina's kids running through a massive, heated game room, a room that used to be my bedroom. They had space for a pool table and a toy collection, but not for their own granddaughter. My heart shattered, but I didn't scream, and I didn't beg. I looked my mother in the eye, wiped a tear from Diana's cheek, and simply said, "Noted." They thought they had won. They thought they had finally put me in my place. What they didn't know was that by closing that door on Diana, they had just locked themselves out of their own future. 3 days later, they would realize that noted wasn't just a word. It was a death sentence for their inheritance. This story is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. If you believe that no child should ever be turned away by their own family, hit that like button right now, comment and subscribe for more videos. The ground didn't just shake, it roared, a subterranean beast tearing the world apart under our feet. I clutched Diana against my chest as our ceiling groaned and finally gave way, the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass drowning out her terrified screams. We escaped with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a single damp teddy bear, stumbling into a night that had turned into an apocalyptic deluge. The rain wasn't just falling, it was punishing us, cold and relentless as we waded through the debris of what used to be our lives. When the wrought iron gates of the Thompson estate finally loomed through the gray mist, I felt a flicker of hope. This was the fortress of my youth, a place of supposed sanctuary. But as we reached the porch, the heavy oak doors didn't swing open in welcome. They cracked just enough for my mother, Catherine, to peer out, her expression as stagnant as a frozen pond. Behind her, the house glowed with a sickeningly warm, golden light. "We heard about the neighborhood, Elena," she said, her voice devoid of any maternal tremor. "It's a tragedy, truly." I moved to step inside, desperate to get Diana out of the biting wind, but my father, Gerald, stepped into the frame, his shadow looming large and oppressive. "Wait," he commanded. "We've discussed this. Regina's children are here for the holiday. Every guest suite is full. We have a reputation to maintain, and a cramped house is a chaotic house. I don't need a suite, Dad," I rasped, my voice cracking from the smoke and the cold. "Just a corner. A rug. Diana is turning blue." Catherine's eyes flickered to my daughter with a clinical detachment that felt like a physical blow. "That's the issue, dear. We simply have no space for her. She's loud, she's messy, and Regina's kids shouldn't have to share their game room. You are welcome to the servants' quarters in the back, Elena, but only if you come alone. The child stays out." I looked past them. In the massive, heated game room, I saw Regina's kids laughing, throwing expensive controllers onto plush rugs, surrounded by more square footage than my entire destroyed apartment. They had room for toys, room for games, room for ego, but no room for a shivering 5-year-old kin. The betrayal surged through me, hotter than the fever starting to burn in Diana's veins. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I felt something inside me snap and go cold. I pulled Diana tighter into the crook of my arm, her small body shaking violently against mine. "Noted," I whispered. The word felt like lead in my mouth. As the massive door began to thud shut, Gerald sneered. "Don't be dramatic, Elena. You'll find a shelter somewhere. Just don't expect a dime from us after this stunt." The lock clicked with finality, leaving us in the dark and the drowning rain. I reached into my pocket, my fingers trembling as I pulled out a burner phone I had kept for a day I hoped would never come. As I dialed a number that hadn't been touched in years, the first lightning strike of the night illuminated a black sedan, idling at the end of the long, private driveway. And I realized we weren't the only ones watching the house. The black sedan didn't move. It sat like a hungry animal at the edge of the Thompson estate, its headlights cutting through the heavy rain. I didn't wait to see who was inside. I turned my back on the mansion and carried Diana into the storm. Every step was a fight against the wind. We walked until my legs felt like lead, finally reaching a cheap, broken-down motel at the edge of town. The room was cold and smelled like old smoke. I quickly pulled the soaked clothes off Diana and wrapped her in a thin, scratchy blanket. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled, and her skin felt like fire. "Mama, why did Grandma lock us out?" she asked in a tiny, broken voice. I couldn't answer her. If I opened my mouth, I would scream. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the secret phone I had kept for years. I dialed the number. It didn't even ring twice. It's time, isn't it? Marcus Noah's voice was deep and calm. They left her in the rain, Marcus, I whispered, watching my daughter shiver. They chose a game room over her. They said there was no space for a child. Then they have lost everything, Marcus replied. I could hear him opening a heavy safe. By morning, the trap your grandfather set will snap shut. Elena, once I sign these papers, there is no going back. You are destroying your parents and your sister. Are you sure? They destroyed themselves when they locked that door, I said, my voice turning to ice. Take it all. Leave them with nothing. Just as I hung up, a loud, heavy thud hit the motel door. It wasn't the wind. Diana screamed and hid under the covers. I crept to the window and moved the curtain just an inch. The black sedan from the mansion was parked right outside my room. A large man stepped out, holding a heavy metal crowbar. In his other hand, he held my sister Regina's expensive silk scarf. He didn't knock again. He raised the crowbar and smashed the lock, the wood splintering as the door flew open. While I was huddled in a dark motel room, the Thompson mansion was glowing with light. My sister, Regina, was throwing a lavish victory party. She told everyone it was a celebration for her daughter's upcoming birthday, but the real reason was written all over her face. She was celebrating the fact that I was finally gone. To peace and quiet, my father Gerald said, raising a glass of expensive champagne. My mother, Catherine, laughed, leaning back into her silk sofa. It's much better this way. Now the children have the entire game room to themselves without any distractions. They were surrounded by gold, warmth, and music, completely unaware that the walls were already closing in. Suddenly, Regina's husband tried to pay the caterers, but he came back with a confused look. The card was declined, he whispered. Gerald scoffed, pulling out his own black titanium card. Must be a glitch at the bank. He handed his card over, but a moment later, the caterer returned, looking nervous. I'm sorry, sir. This one is declined, too. In fact, it says the account is frozen by a court order. The music died as the room went silent. Just then, the heavy oak doors, the same ones they had locked in my face, swung open. Marcus Noah walked in, looking like a shadow in his dark suit. He didn't say hello. He didn't look at the guests. He walked straight to the center of the room and placed a thick stack of legal documents on the table, right next to the expensive cake. What is the meaning of this? Gerald roared, his face turning purple with rage. Who are you? I am the executor of the Thompson estate, Marcus said, his voice cold and loud enough for everyone to hear. And I am here to inform you that as of 10 minutes ago, you are all trespassing. Regina stepped forward, her voice high and shaky. That's impossible. This house belongs to my parents. Marcus looked at her with a chilling smile. Actually, Regina, according to your grandfather's hidden trust, this house belongs to the heir who was denied shelter during the storm. By chasing Elena and Diana away in the rain, you didn't just win a game room. You forfeited every single cent you ever thought was yours. Before Gerald could respond, his phone began to scream with alerts. One by one, the guests' phones started buzzing. A news alert had just broken. The Thompson fortune had been seized. But the real horror came when Marcus pointed to the window. The black sedan was gone, but the police were pulling into the driveway, and they weren't there to help the Thompsons. They were carrying a warrant for Regina's husband, and they were asking where he had been for the last hour. The motel room was a battlefield of paper and digital screens. While the Thompsons were drowning in confusion at the mansion, Marcus Noah sat across from me in the dim light, his fingers flying across a laptop. The man with the crowbar had been a distraction, a hired hand sent by Regina's husband to steal the trust documents. He hadn't expected Marcus to be prepared. Now that man was in handcuffs, and we had the one thing the Thompsons feared most: evidence of their cruelty. They think this is just about money, Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. They don't understand that your grandfather didn't build a fortune. He built a cage. He knew his children were vipers. He designed this trust to snap shut the moment they showed their true nature. He turned the screen toward me. It showed the morality clause, a section of the legal text highlighted in a deep, bloody red. It stated that any family member who intentionally endangered the health or safety of a direct descendant would be immediately stripped of all assets. By leaving a 5-year-old child in a catastrophic storm after an earthquake, Catherine and Gerald hadn't just been mean, they had legally committed familial abandonment. I've already alerted the board of their charitable foundations, Marcus continued, a cold smile touching his lips. By noon tomorrow, their names will be stripped from every building in this city. The social suicide is already underway. But we need one more thing to finish them. He pulled out a small, high-definition recorder. The security footage from the porch captured every word. Your mother saying there was no space. Your father telling you to not expect a dime. It's the final nail in the coffin. But Regina is desperate, Elena. She's currently trying to move the family's remaining offshore gold into a private account in her husband's name. I looked at Diana, who was finally sleeping peacefully, her fever broken. The rage that had been a fire in my chest was now a cold, hard stone. Let her try, I said. Every move she makes is just another digital footprint for the fraud investigators. Marcus nodded and stood up, straightening his tie. The final hearing is in 6 hours. They've hired the most expensive defense team money can buy, but there's a problem they haven't realized yet. What's that? I asked. Marcus looked at me with a gaze that could pierce steel. They're trying to pay their lawyers with money that, as of 3 minutes ago, legally belongs to your daughter. When they walk into that courtroom, they won't just be losing their house. They'll be walking into a trap that has been set for decades. The cliffhanger? Marcus's phone buzzed with a frantic text from an unknown number. It was a photo of the motel parking lot, taken from a high-angle roof. Someone else was watching us. Someone who didn't care about the law or the trust. The clock on the motel wall ticked like a countdown to an explosion. Outside, the rain had slowed to a miserable drizzle, but the atmosphere inside the room was suffocating. Marcus stood by the window, his hand resting near his coat pocket, watching the shadows in the parking lot. The photo on his phone was clear. Someone was on the roof across the street, and they were holding a long-range camera. Or a rifle. Regina isn't playing by the rules anymore, Marcus whispered, his voice vibrating with tension. She's realized that if the hearing happens tomorrow morning, she's finished. She's moved past lawyers. She's looking for a permanent solution to her Elena problem. I looked at the door, which was still splintered from the earlier attack. Every sound, a car driving by, the wind rattling the glass, made my heart hammer against my ribs. I wasn't just a daughter fighting for an inheritance anymore. I was a mother protecting a target. We can't stay here, I said, grabbing Diana's small bag. If they know where we are, we're sitting ducks. That's exactly what they want, Marcus replied, turning to me with a sharp, calculated glint in his eyes. They want you to run. If you disappear tonight, they'll tell the judge you fled with the child to avoid a CPS investigation. They'll use your flight as proof that you're unstable. The escalation was relentless. My phone began to vibrate, not with a call, but with a flood of notifications. Regina had gone nuclear. She had leaked a heavily edited video to the local news. It showed me screaming at the gates of the estate, but the audio had been altered to make it sound like I was threatening to hurt Diana if they didn't give me money. They're turning the whole city against you, Marcus growled, checking his watch. The police will be looking for this car within the hour. Your father just used his last bit of influence to put out a welfare check order on Diana. The stakes were now at a lethal high. We were trapped in a motel room with an assassin on the roof, the police on the way, and a family that was willing to burn the entire world down just to keep their game room. We have to get to the courthouse now, I said, my voice shaking but firm. The bridge is blocked, Elena. There's only one other way out of this district, Marcus said, looking at the dark woods behind the motel. But we'll have to leave the car. We have to go on foot, through the mud, in the dark. Just as we reached for the back door, the motel's power cut out. Total darkness swallowed us. Then, the sound of boots hitting the floorboards came from the room next door, followed by the distinct clack-clack of a weapon being readied. The darkness in the motel room was absolute, broken only by the terrifying sound of footsteps in the hallway. I held my hand over Diana's mouth, feeling her tiny heart racing against my palm. We didn't move. We didn't even breathe. The door didn't burst open. Instead, the wall groaned as the person in the next room began to kick through the thin, rotting drywall. Go. Out the back, Marcus hissed, shoving the heavy trust file into my arms. We scrambled through the rear exit into the freezing mud of the woods. Behind us, the motel room erupted in the sound of splintering wood and shouted orders. We ran until my lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. We weren't heading for the courthouse anymore. We were heading for the lion's den. If we can't get to the judge, I panted as we reached the edge of the Thompson property, we bring the judge to them. Marcus checked his phone. The morning news crew is already at your parents' gates. They're waiting for a statement from your father about your disappearance. If we walk through those gates right now, the entire world will see the truth before the police can touch us. As we approached the mansion, the scene was chaotic. Bright lights from news vans cut through the mist. My father, Gerald, stood on the porch in an expensive suit, looking like a grieving grandfather for the cameras. Catherine stood beside him, dabbing fake tears from her eyes. My daughter is unstable, Gerald told the reporters, his voice booming with false authority. She took our granddaughter into the storm, and we fear for her life. We are offering a reward for. You don't have to offer a dime, Dad, I shouted, stepping out of the shadows and into the blinding glare of the television lights. The silence that followed was deafening. The reporters turned their cameras toward me, soaked, muddy, and holding a shivering Diana. My mother's face went from grieving to pure, unfiltered horror in a split second. She knew that as long as the cameras were rolling, she couldn't call her fixers. "Elena!" Regina shrieked, running onto the porch. "You're trespassing. Get off this property." "Actually," Marcus Noah stepped forward, raising the trust file so every camera could see the official seal. "I'm the one who should be saying that. I am Marcus Noah, and I'm here to serve an immediate eviction and asset seizure notice." The lead reporter shoved a microphone toward Marcus. "On what grounds?" Marcus looked directly into the camera lens. "On the grounds of the morality clause, and because the true owner of this estate has finally arrived to claim her bedroom." He looked at Diana, then at the shocked faces of my parents. "And she's not sharing her game room with anyone." Just then, a black car with government plates pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the local police. It was the district attorney, and he looked furious. The district attorney stepped out of the car, his face as hard as stone. The reporters swarmed him, but he pushed past them, his eyes locked onto my father. Gerald tried to put on a smile, reaching out a hand as if they were still old friends at the country club. "Arthur, thank goodness you're here. My daughter has lost her mind, and this lawyer is—" "Quiet, Gerald," the DA snapped. He didn't shake my father's hand. Instead, he turned to Marcus Noah and took the trust file. He flipped to the final page, his eyes scanning the signatures. The silence in the driveway was so thick you could hear the rain dripping off the roof. My mother, Catherine, was trembling, her expensive silk shawl ruined by the damp air. Regina was frantically typing on her phone, likely trying to move money that was already gone. "The morality clause is ironclad," the DA announced, loud enough for the news microphones to catch every word. "And I've just reviewed the audio recording from last night. I watched the footage of you two standing on this porch while your granddaughter shivered in a disaster zone. In this state, that isn't just a violation of a trust, it's a felony." The crowd gasped. My father's face went from pale to a ghostly white. "You can't do this. This is my house." "It was never your house, Gerald." Marcus Noah stepped forward, his voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "You were merely a tenant at will, conditioned on your ability to care for the next generation. You failed the only test that mattered." He then turned to the police officers standing by the gate. "Officers, please escort the former residents off the premises. They are allowed 1 suitcase each. Anything else belongs to the trust." "1 suitcase," Regina shrieked, looking at the massive mansion. "I have a lifetime of things in there. My children's toys, my jewelry." "You said there was no space for a 5-year-old child," I said, stepping toward her, my voice low and steady. "Now there's no space for you. Not in this house, and not in this family." As the police began to lead my parents and sister toward the gate, the front door of the mansion creaked open. The warm, golden light spilled out onto the wet pavement. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. But as the DA turned to leave, he leaned into Marcus and whispered something that made Marcus's face go pale. Marcus looked at me, his eyes filled with a new kind of fear. "Elena," he whispered, "your father didn't just spend the family money. He put the house up as collateral for a loan with some people who don't care about trusts or morality clauses. And they're coming to collect the debt tonight." The victory felt cold the moment Marcus spoke. As my parents were led away in handcuffs, their screams for mercy fading into the rain, a new silence settled over the estate, a silence that felt heavy and dangerous. "What do you mean collateral?" I asked, clutching Diana closer. Marcus pulled me inside the house and locked the heavy oak doors. The warmth of the mansion felt fake now. "Your father was desperate to keep up appearances, Elena. When the trust fund started to dry up years ago, he didn't stop spending. He went to a private lender, a man named Silas Vane. He took out a $50 million loan to fund Regina's lifestyle and his own bad investments. He used this property to back it. But he didn't own the property," I argued. "The trust did." "Vane doesn't care about the law," Marcus said, checking the security monitors. "He's a shadow banker. To him, a signature is a promise, and if the promise is broken, he takes the land by force. He knows the trust just transferred to you, which means he's coming to make you pay for your father's sins." Suddenly, the house's perimeter alarms began to chime. On the screen, 3 black SUVs, identical to the ones that had hunted us at the motel, smashed through the front gates. They didn't care about the reporters or the few police officers left on the street. They drove straight onto the lawn, ruining the perfectly manicured grass. "They're here," Marcus whispered. I looked around the grand hall. This was the place that had just been returned to me, the home I had promised my daughter. I saw her small shadow hiding behind a marble pillar, her eyes wide with fear. The rage I felt for my parents was nothing compared to the fire now burning for the men outside. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly calm, Does the trust include the security protocols my grandfather installed during the Cold War? A slow, grim smile spread across the lawyer's face. It does, and your grandfather was a very paranoid man. I walked to the master control panel, hidden behind a family portrait. I didn't hesitate. I entered the code I had memorized from a letter left in my husband's will. Outside, steel shutters began to hiss down over every window, turning the mansion into a literal fortress. But as the final shutter closed, a voice boomed over the house's external intercom. It wasn't my father. It was a man with a voice like grinding stones. Elena Thompson, Silas Vane said. You have 10 minutes to open this door and hand over the deed, or I'll burn this house down with everyone inside. And tell your father I found the second child he tried to hide. My heart stopped. Second child? I looked at Marcus, and for the first time, he looked truly terrified. The air in the grand hall turned freezing. What second child? I demanded, my voice trembling. Marcus wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the steel-reinforced door, as if he could see Silas Vane standing on the other side. Your father had a twin brother, Elena, Marcus whispered, his words falling like lead. He was hidden away because he was born with a claim to the estate that Gerald couldn't let stand. Silas Vane isn't just a lender, he's your uncle's son. He's the cousin you never knew existed, and he believes this house belongs to his bloodline, not yours. The intercom crackled again. 5 minutes, Elena. I can smell the old wood from here. I have enough gasoline to turn this fortress into a funeral pyre. I looked at Diana. She was the reason I had fought through the earthquake and the rejection. She was the youngest heir. I realized then that my grandfather hadn't just built this house for me. He had built it as a test for the entire family. I walked back to the control panel, my hands steady. Marcus, if I trigger the final disposition protocol, what happens? The house is surrendered to the state for public use, Marcus warned. You lose the inheritance. The money, the walls, the history, it all vanishes. You'll be back in that motel room with nothing. No, I said, looking at the monitors as Silas Vane splashed liquid against the front door. I'll have my daughter, and he'll have nothing to kill us for. I didn't wait for permission. I slammed my palm against the emergency override. A siren began to wail, a sound so loud it shook the very foundation of the estate. On the screens, I watched Silas Vane's face twist in confusion as the gates at the end of the driveway locked permanently and the sprinkler systems, not just inside, but across the entire lawn, erupted in a high-pressure flood, drenching his men and their gasoline. The police sirens returned, louder this time, accompanied by federal vehicles. The final disposition didn't just surrender the house, it sent an automatic distress signal to the authorities that a high-value trust was being liquidated under duress. As the feds swarmed the lawn, tackling Silas Vane and his men into the mud, I picked up Diana. The steel shutters began to rise, letting in the first pale light of a new dawn. The house was no longer a Thompson fortress, it was a shell. Where will we go? Diana asked softly. I looked at Marcus, who held a small, weathered key he had pulled from the back of the trust file. Your grandfather had a second trust, Marcus said, a small smile appearing. One that didn't depend on mansions or gold. A small cottage by the sea, titled in your name since the day you were born. No one knows about it. Not your parents, not Silas, not even the bank. I took the key, feeling its weight. I walked past the gold-leafed mirrors and the marble statues without a single glance back. We stepped out into the crisp, morning air, leaving the ruins of a greedy dynasty behind us. For the first time, there was plenty of space for us, and finally, we were going home. If you love this story, don't forget to subscribe and follow so you never miss the next gripping chapter or a brand new series.